So welcome everybody to the NJ Environmental Fundraisers Gathering. Today we have Jarrett and as well as Deandra from Fundraising Academy. Jarrett's going to chat with us a little bit about our donors and how to retain them.
Yeah.
So I hand the floor over to Jarrett.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren. Really excited to be here again. Deandra is here with me. So Deandra, if you don't mind just popping off of or popping on real quick so we can see your face. So Deandra is joining me from San Diego. If those of you heard earlier, she is with Fundraising Academy at National University. And thanks to her and the team, I was able to come and present here. So if you have any questions specifically around the topic and the curriculum and all of that we offer, feel free to message Deandra directly. Maybe, while I'm presenting, there'll be some information at the end for you to connect with myself, but also to learn more about the curriculum in which really today's session is framed around. So thank you, Deandra. I'll let you go back to multitasking, I'm sure. Just wanted to make an intro since a new face and a new name to this group. So again, I'm really excited to be here talking to all of you about reconnecting with your lapse donors and providing some stewardship strategies, because I think that's really the key to how we do that. I mentioned Fundraising Academy. So all of this is really coming out of a course curriculum that they offer. This is my book. As you can see, there's lots of sticky notes inside of it. I'm honored to be one of the trainers with Fundraising Academy at National University. So really excited to be here. I've done some work in the environmental space. And in fact, in Charleston, South Carolina, I was working with an environmental organization. I haven't done a lot of professional work in this space. Personally, I've done a lot of work. Huge fan, obviously, of Mother Earth and our environment, and however and whatever we can do to maintain the health of our environment so that it's here for us and for future. So again, I'm really honored to be here. When Lauren reached out, I said, I would love to speak. Can we do this, more or less in partnership with Fundraising Academy? So thanks again to Deandra. So in this webinar, I just want to help set the stage, right, before diving right into it, is environmental nonprofits. All of you, as we just learned, there's not just learned, but we just lost one of our members to jump off to take care of some federal communications that's going on. I know there's a lot happening in your space right now. And so I also believe that environmental nonprofits often face the perception of being a secondary cause. I'm just going to say that because I think that's reality, right? I mean, and correct me if that's not reality, but that's really what I am seeing. We know this isn't true though, right? Because compared to food, housing, healthcare, the work that you're doing impacts that, right? Like this is a part of social determinants of health. Add to that limited staff capacity, tight budgets, you name it. So quite a few objectives that I'm going to cover in what seems like a really short amount of time for today's conversation. But I'm here with you. And again, if myself or Deandra can be of service beyond today's conversation, we're certainly here to do that. As I mentioned, the cause selling cycle, again, this is a cycle including 8 essential steps. Now, I've been in the fundraising world 25 plus years. I just learned of cause selling in Fundraising Academy probably like 5 years ago. I share that because even as seasoned fundraisers, it's okay. You can dive right in, and the chances are you are likely doing some of these efforts and initiatives naturally. I found that I was. So really, there are 3 main phases to this 8-step model. And, really looking at all of this, you could consider it to a sales cycle, removing a mission tied to that, if you will, and really just seeing how this is very similar from the prospecting and the pre-approach in phase 1. Phase 2, we've got 4 steps in there, including approaching the donor, a need discovery, presentation, and then also how do you handle objections. And then the third and final stage of the cycle is the ask and stewardship. And I really want to call out the stewardship, and that is the one that we are going to focus today. This is step 8, the final step of the cause selling cycle. That doesn't mean the cycle stops. It doesn't mean it's done. It means you just keep going. You start again, right? So the way you follow up with the donors after they make a gift is as important, or perhaps even more important, than that gift itself, right? And the renewal rate of donors who give the second time after their first gift is 50%. So that's a dramatic reduction. Just to think how ludicrous this might be, right? If you think of going to a local restaurant, would you expect for only half of the people who came to the restaurant to ever return? And think about that. I think about that when I go to restaurants. I think, would I come back here, or would I be part of that, donor retention or loss, lapsing customer, right? And just think about that. So in fact, the reason why 80% of the restaurants fail within their first 5 years is because there's not loyalty from the patrons. Maybe, other things, there's poor service, health code violations, right? There's so many different things. So these statistics, really should prompt you and your organization to be future focused, to start asking some really tough questions about your donor attrition. So one of which is, if people made an effort to support my nonprofit in the first place, why, right? Then what is happening after they make a gift that causes half of them to say no to the next time they're asked to give? So just think about that. And maybe you've heard that before, but that to me is kind of an alarming statistic if we only get 50% back, and using that restaurant analogy. So when we think of donor lapsing, really donors stop giving for a lot of reasons. And on the slide, you can see some of those reasons, and I'm sure you can add to them. But donors stop giving for a lot of reasons. Maybe they feel unappreciated. Maybe they weren't sure that their gift made an impact in the first place, or maybe they forgot. I think all of us have a lot going on in our lives. I just think that's like the standard norm now. So really just, staying in touch with the donors, it could be as simple as they forgot to make their gift. But thoughtful and authentic communication can truly bring these donors back. So when you show them that you've noticed they've gone missing, their absence is noticed, right? And care about the connection, they're more likely to come back and to re-engage with you. So don't worry, there is absolutely hope. So what exactly is donor retention? Many of you, I'm sure, have a widget, if you will, on your donor database, if you're fortunate enough to have a donor database beyond like an Excel spreadsheet. So many of these databases will have this widget that tells you exactly what your donor retention rate is. And it could be by calendar year, or it could be by your fiscal year if it's different than the calendar. So every single thing that we do as fundraisers impact that donor retention. Our actions, or our lack of actions, right, contribute to donor retention. And it's simply the number of donors who give after their first gift. Donor acquisition. I like to bring this up because although we're talking about stewardship and a little bit about donor retention, I want to bring up the stats, or some facts rather, around donor acquisition. You've probably all heard this, but it costs so very much more to acquire donors. And especially if you're having to spend this money year over year after year to acquire new donors, and not spending that time, that energy, that investment into retaining your donors, this will constantly be a budget drain, right? So I bring up the cost of donor acquisition. AFP Global has some really good information on this. Also, Double the Donation has some information if you want to dig a little deeper, or just Google, right? That's our friend as well, donor acquisition cost. And maybe you could really start to see how that's impacting your bottom line. Right now, the average rate of our donor retention in our sector, in the nonprofit at large, 42.6. So we can round up to 43%, right? So that is less than the 50% restaurant analogy that I provided earlier. So this means, right, that for every 100 donors that have given to your organization, only 40 will return that next year. So that is worse than the restaurant. But I just want to bring that up as a point of discussion. So to keep your donors, right, and to keep them from lapsing, it's really all about creating long-term relationships. I know we hear before, but it's not about the transaction. It's about how every gift can be transformational and building these partnerships with your supporters. So to create these long-term relationships, you can celebrate them publicly with their permission, of course. Make sure you certainly get their permission and ask them how would they like to be recognized. You can highlight these donors and supporters in your newsletters, your social media, your annual reports, a direct mail campaign. There are so many ways to do this. I really like to capture the stories. Your board members are usually the first that will say yes to being a guinea pig, but ask them if they would be willing to share why they choose to give to your organization. Again, their time, their talents, their treasures. Why do they choose to give? Ask if they would be willing to capture this in, it could be a soundbite or it could be in text, right? And you can share it in these various platforms. To also create long-term, I want you to acknowledge the milestones, right? Maybe you have their birth date in your donor database. If not, one of the tricks that I like to do with the clients I work with is donor anniversaries. So there's 12 months in a calendar, and at some point, a donor has given in one of those 12 months as their very first gift, right? So I implement this strategy again with my clients, and I say every single month, I want you to run a report of who has given to your organization that month. Now, the one thing I do want to caution you on is to know your data. Is it clean? Is your data hygiene up to snuff, right? Like really knowing if we send an anniversary to Denise and say, Denise, in January of 2020, you gave your first gift to our organization. Thank you so very much. And over the course of your giving, you have provided $5 million. Thank you, by the way, Denise, you're a phenomenal donor to our organization, right? And to really demonstrate that impact. Now, if Denise is like, yeah, I did give, but it wasn't until April. And I know very specifically it was in April. And I actually gave 500 and not 5 million. That will actually tarnish your organization. And Denise, I want you to know that 500 is still phenomenal. So thank you for your gift. Right? Regardless of the size, but knowing your donors, celebrating their anniversaries. So having a monthly outreach to your donors, again, this could be at any year. And this is why I love it, because we might not have our donors' birthdays, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we do know the first time they've given to our organization. And I divvy that out again. Every January, I pull a list and I send some acknowledgments. Every February, I pull a list, send the acknowledgments. You get the cadence. So think of that instead of birth dates. That is something you could certainly do. And then, of course, the core principle on this is to retain retention rather. It grows when donors feel like they're partners. They want to be partners in the mission, not just sources of funding. We've heard this, I'm sure, but they're not piggy banks, right? They're partners, they're people. They have a choice on where to give. There are 1.8 million nonprofits in the US. This is me nerding out, but there's 1.8 million. So when we come to competition, that's what I believe we're competing against, right? I don't necessarily see that we are competing against others here on this Zoom, but we are likely competing against finite dollars of a donor, and they have choices. So I even use that language when I send acknowledgments is we realize you have a choice, and we are so grateful that you chose to make an impact with us on fill in the blank, right? So that kind of language really leans into the partnership. So let's talk about why donors stay, which is a much, I don't know, better conversation than why they leave, but we're going to talk about that next. Really, you know, they stay also for a lot of reasons. There are a variety why donors choose to continue to invest in causes. The most common is trust in your organization, your mission, your impacts, your operations, maybe the donation impact, right? It's important to all donor categories: crowdfunding, annual giving, leadership, major, and even principal gifts. Although the gift increment might differ, the sacrifice should be viewed as relative, right? So again, that donation impact. They likely care deeply about the cause and your mission. So that mission alignment will drive the decision making. They likely also feel appreciated and they share views with you and your organization. Influencers, that to me means they have been influenced by their peers. So those personal relationships with current donors, endorsements by notable community leaders, could also mean board giving, founders, if you have founders still related. So really like what's influencing their gift. And then the last but not least, it might not be the most altruistic reason, but it is still a reason, is the tax benefit, right? So contribute to decision making, especially with higher network individuals. So that is some reasons perhaps why donors stay. And again, there's so many more reasons, why that might be. But now let's talk about I don't know, the more less fun, the less fun reason why donors leave. They might feel that they're not needed. They might feel unappreciated. Maybe they never felt acknowledged for their contribution. I've got multiple stories of my own about this, and I'm sure all of you joining me live or even recording can relate back to maybe a time where you have made a gift and either did not get acknowledged or didn't feel acknowledged for the contribution that you made. Another reason why people leave is they're unsure of that funding impact. There could be you could be lacking that clear communication from your organization to the donor that could be lost in narrative. One of the things that I've heard over my career is to ask, think, report, and repeat, right? So you're asking them for a gift. You are immediately thanking them for that gift. You are reporting to them how that gift made a difference, and then you're repeating that, right? So all of that really builds into a similar cycle. Additionally, here, they could feel that other organizations are more deserving at this time, and they can simply no longer afford a situational reason. That certainly comes up. And one of the stories I have there is I was working with a major donor. They had triplets that were leaving for college, and they simply told me this is not the time that we have any extra spending, any extra ability. And guess what? I honored that. I truly honored that. I wish them well. I wish all three of their kids the best in college. Of course, we stayed in touch with them, and I asked if it was okay to still, maintain communication so that they would come back when their situational, time has changed. So when you think of that, again, there's a lot of reasons both why people stay and why they leave. But I want you to get to know your donors, because that is the best way to know how and when they might leave, or how and when to get them to stay, right? So really, when we look at this in step one of the cause selling cycle, that is prospecting. So if you think, when I first started and I showed you the cycle, the very first step is to prospect your donor. So that means understanding maybe even their social style, right? Are they drivers? Are they expressives? Meaning, are they assertive? Are they high emotional responsiveness? Do they value relationships? How do they value those relationships? You've got some amiables, and that could be low assertiveness. They support specialists, really looking at it in different ways. And then you've got those analytics. They're task-oriented, could be low assertiveness, but technical specialist. And so knowing your donors and kind of their social style, if you will, that will help you to know, how do we make the best connections with our supporters? How do we go back to them to re-engage them, to bring them back in from a lapsed donor to a renewed donor, if you will? So there's a lot of ways to do that, but knowing your donors, and as the slide, has as well, really knowing their background, what drives them, what is the backgrounds that you can talk to them about their areas of interest, and tracking this data, tracking this data is so very critical for your organization. And I preach this over and over and over again. At some point, all of us here on this Zoom call, right, will no longer be involved in the organization in which we're serving. But it is our duty, to leave these notes to the people that follow us, right? Because the worst thing, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, is to show up at an organization. We're looking in the donor database and we're like, where's the information on this person? I know nothing about this person except for their name is Lauren Swern. I have no idea where they live. I have no idea their giving history. I have no idea, any other information about them. That means we are not doing ourselves justice, and we will likely lose supporters, right, as time goes on. So get to know your donors. Also reconnect by knowing them and expressing to them how, how important their relationship or their partnership, as we continue to use that language, really means to you and the organization and the impact that they are helping to create. So go beyond that basic stewardship, right? Reconnect in a conversation. I know often our phones feel like bricks, right? Like many of us don't like to pick up the phone. We don't like to call. Guess what? People like to talk, right? They like to talk about themselves. They like to talk about what's important to them. So I encourage you to pick up the phone, especially as we move into end of year fundraising, and make sure again that you track all of these in your donor database, because everything you're learning from these conversations, every touch point, right? You are learning to ask better questions with your supporters. You're learning them inside and out and knowing what drives them, what are they passionate about, even what's their presentation style. So when it's time to ask for that 5 million gift of Denise, at this point, I will already know she's going to want a PowerPoint presentation. She's going to have questions, like let's think above and beyond before just showing up and not quite knowing her. So really, all of these are data points to help you secure a gift or a second gift. And I want you to learn why they lapsed. You could send a short survey. I don't think that many organizations do this often enough, right? I really don't think we are asking our supporters how we're doing, what we could do better. You could call them, right? Again, pick up that brick. It works. Directly ask, the why. Simply, why is it maybe that they've left? I want to share a story. Now, it's not my story, but I saw it on LinkedIn over the weekend, and it really resonated with me. And it was an individual, and he does fundraising for faith-based organizations, mostly religious institutions, i.e. churches. So he shared this story, and it actually had to do with volunteers, but I thought it was relevant enough to share with you today, in particular, when it comes to calling directly and ask them. So the story that he shared was around losing volunteers, noticing that this church in particular has drastically lost the number of volunteers that they used to have. So they made phone calls. They asked the volunteers, hey, really curious. We noticed you stopped volunteering. Can we ask why? The majority of the response, and this is what was shocking to me, was, you're not using me for my talents and the reason why I came to volunteer. So knowing why they chose to give, maybe why they chose to volunteer, and making sure you're going that extra effort, right? And his whole point of this was, we as nonprofit leaders or volunteer coordinators, or fill in the blank title, volunteer person, it's really figuring out, how do we best use the skill set and the interest of those offering it, right? So when it comes to our donors, what is it that they're most passionate about? So as I mentioned, I was working with an organization in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was working with a foundation in particular. They had previously done a lot of solar energy investment. So I was creating a case for support to ask them for additional funding for solar. Thankfully, I had a conversation with them, and they actually tell me that they've switched their funding priorities. They're still giving to solar, but they're prioritizing wind power, right? If I had gone forward with the solar ask and not have had this conversation, I would have missed the mark, completely missed the mark. So really knowing why the organization is giving, where an organization and or person, right? Where are they prioritizing their philanthropic support right now, and not assuming that it'll stay the same year over year over year. So a couple of anecdotal stories to share with you there. I want you to also think about a reconnection ask and tailoring that to meet their specific, reason. So you could use welcome back messaging. This lets them know that we noticed that they left, right? We noticed that they were not there. We could also offer a smaller or a lower barrier ask. And the whole point of this is, guess what? To simply get them back into the donor cycle. Get them back in so we can work our magic maybe better than we did before when it comes to the stewardship, right? Really thanking them, acknowledging them, making it important, and suggest alternative ways to re-engage. Maybe they want to come back as a volunteer. Maybe you have an opportunity, invitation for them to sign a petition or a pledge, right? That is a low barrier opportunity. Following on social media. So it doesn't have to be a monetary ask. We want to bring them back into the fold, if you will. We want to re-engage, rebuild their trust, really work with them so that we can start the stewardship cycle and know them better, right? It's really about knowing your supporters. And I really do see supporters in all ways. They're financial, they give up their time, they give up their advocacy. There's a lot of ways to re-engage and to consider a supporter. So think about your organization and the many, many ways, high barrier entrance, low barrier entrance, right? And everything in between. So there's some opportunities to think there. And then know that that personal outreach matters, right? You could share a personal story or an impact update that's relevant to their past giving, and you could pair the right messenger. So maybe you, Lauren, aren't the right person to really catch the attention and the long-term effort, if you will, from the supporter. Maybe it's a board member. Maybe it's that influencer that I said earlier in the slide, right? Who is this person influenced by? How might we bring in another person to really help to create this personal outreach? So when you think of that, think of yourself, think of your team. Your team could be board, it could be volunteers, it could be additional staff members. So just think about all the ways that you can really create this personal outreach. And then develop these meaningful relationships, right? 4 key ways on how you can do this. Number 1 is to be intentional. So prioritizing your donor stewardship list, I think, is extremely important. Developing a stewardship calendar. I have a resource I'm going to share with you here in a bit. And to set reminder notices. I do that in my calendar. So whether it's Outlook or Google, whatever, I will set that on there, as well as your donor database and your CRM. You should be able to set tasks or reminders, alerts, right? Different messages. So use that so that you can be intentional. The second is to create a list of essential information. Again, this could be their educational background, their profession, their family, their preferences, and what they're interested in. So create a list of this essential information. I had a donor, I knew he was really big into boating and regattas, and I had never learned more about regattas until I started talking to this donor. And then I would see little stories, I would see a little news clipping, right? And I would send a little handwritten note. I would like tear that out. Or nowadays we can send an email with a link to the article, right? There's so many ways to go beyond how to connect in a meaningful way. And then also you can discover something new every single interaction that you have with your supporters. So every time you talk to them, if you can, you're not caught off guard, but review your notes from the previous meetings. And again, hopefully from previous fundraisers that have left copious, notes for us to read, and to create an additional open-ended question. This could be about something personal. It could be interest related, maybe something in alignment with your organization. Philanthropic centered, right? So like, what is the donor motivation? You really want to know from them, what is it that they're passionate about? Why now are they giving to this cause? Or why now have they increased their gift, right? Really understanding that and discovering something new every single interaction. And again, record all of this in your CRM, in your customer relationship management, in your donor database. What type of interaction was it? Was it a phone call? Was it an in-person meeting? Maybe you saw them at another organization's event, right? But you had a conversation. Make note of the type of interaction. put your meeting notes in there. So what was relevant that needs to be captured. And then again, if you were to leave the organization, what do you think the next person would need to know to continue to steward this meaningful relationship? Thank you cards. They are not dead. They are still here. And people like them, I think, more than ever. I'm talking handwritten with a mail, postage stamp, because this definitely stands out, as I know many of us get mostly bills in the mail or just, junk mail. So those thank you cards. And then also just, next steps that should be in your records and your donor databases. Again, what is it you talked about? What are the next steps? So capturing all of that is really helpful. Okay. I'm going through this. There's a lot to go through and I feel like I'm going through it pretty fast. I will have time at the end. So of course, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat box and we can also go through them at the end. So either way is fine. So I used philanthropic centered a few moments ago, and I just want to elaborate on what this is. So when you ask these philanthropic centered questions, you are helping to determine core values when they're making a gift to your organization, right? And the sample questions that you see here are open-ended and they are meant to guide questions to help determine the person's linkage to your organization, their ability to give, and their interest to give, right? All of these are essential elements when building a meaningful relationship with your supporters. And it also helps you to practice active listening. Sure, we've heard it, 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason, right? It is okay to have an awkward pause. It is absolutely okay to ask a question and be quiet, right? Because they will speak, they will talk. And don't make assumptions, right? Absolutely follow up with clarifying questions. I'm not going to go into this part of the cycle, but if you remember in the very beginning, cause selling has 8 steps, right? In the cause selling cycle. One of them is to handle objections. I did a completely separate webinar on this. I used to be terrified of handling objections, right? I was like, oh my gosh, this is when they say no. This is when I don't know what to say next. This is when they tell me all the reasons why they can't give. And I just say, okay, I get it. I'll leave you alone, that kind of thing. Really, when I learned that handling objections is absolutely your best friend when it comes to securing a gift, because that step in the model, that is what gives you additional insight on your supporter, on your donor, so that you know how to best provide additional information. When you are in the handling objections and they're asking questions, again, ask follow-up questions to clarify so they know that you are paying attention and you really do care about how they want to invest their dollars. I believe we are here truly to steward our donor dollars. And we need to do that the best way that they intend to do, right? Not just because we have a failing program that can't, it's not self-sustaining and that we as an organization urgently need this funding for this program. We really need to rely on the donor to tell us how they wish to invest those dollars and steward their giving appropriately. So I share that with you as well. Okay, as we dive deeper, these are some top tips for engagement, right? So look at these as opportunities for your donors to see your work in action. Maybe interact with your team, your staff, your volunteer, your board members, maybe even some other donors. Maybe hear from some beneficiaries, right? And to learn the impact of their gift. These are all wonderful opportunities for engagement. The organization that I was working with in Charleston, we had some really beautiful boating trips, right? We would go to like these beautiful riparian areas. We would bring donors with us and we would just have a really nice time to show them the work in action, have a staff there with us, have other donors there with us. It really lends itself to a beautiful opportunity for engagement and to build out your community. So hopefully you're doing some of that in some way, shape, or form that works best for you. And again, think of other ways to really engage your donors. Now, I want to call this out because I know many of us are working on shoestring budgets, right? So I want to say that yes, absolutely. You can still do great stewardship, even with limited resources. You really don't need big gala budgets or those glossy mailers, right, to steward your donors. In fact, sometimes that makes them mad. They might think, how much do they pay for this, right? Are my dollars being used in the best for the organization? So instead, I want you to focus on high impact and some low cost strategies. And again, handwritten thank you notes, perfect example. You could do a short personalized video message. Those are so easy nowadays, right? Especially with these smartphones that all of us have. You can do a quick little message, and especially if you're out, with a program, your work in action, take the camera out right then and there. Do a quick little video, right? These videos go a long way. You could also invite them to join you. Maybe you have a nature walk with staff. Maybe you have some kind of an opportunity for them to engage. So just think, not everything has to come with big ticket. I still work with so many organizations that will say, I feel like I need to send our donors a gift. And I tell them time and time again, they really don't want gifts, right? Like the majority don't want gifts. Now, if you do that survey that I mentioned previously, and they actually say they want gifts, that might skew my data. But by and large, right, most people don't want, they want gifts. They just want to know that you have paid attention, their gift is meaningful, right? You're stewarding them and the dollars and the best for the organization. So the key is to build out consistency in your stewardship, right? And really having multiple touch points over time. Now, when we think of retention, here's 3 top retention tips. Think like a donor. Hopefully, we've all been a donor at some point in our life, and we can think back to those organizations that really treated us well, right? And we can also think back separately on organizations that missed the mark completely. So think like a donor and think, how would you want to be communicated with? How would you like to be stewarded? And then treat everyone like a VIP. So again, Denise, whether you gave 5 million or 500, I am so very grateful for your support, right? And here's the impact that your investment has done with us in partnership, right? So really looking at that as a VIP. And say thank you. Thank you like you mean it. There are way too many automations right now. Automation is fine. I do also recommend that you go back and you review your automations and you revise them. I say quarterly. So when you think of your donate button online and it sends an autoresponder, think about changing that every quarter. Think about making that an opportunity to tell your supporters the impact that happened last quarter, right? Let them know what they're being a part of. So saying thank you like you mean it, and not like a robot, because we all get the same acknowledgments, right? We know exactly when we see that. We know it. We can spot it a mile away, and it just kind of starts to seem icky. So again, we're not looking at transactional. These donors are not piggy banks. They are our partners. And once we really are able to convey that, I think you'll be really, really happy. So when we think of follow-ups, there are 4 P's on here: prompt, personalized, passionate, and positive. So prompt is timely communication, right? That sets the standard for professionalism. The standard really is still 48 hours after a donation comes in. I know for many organizations that's really hard. I see that myself. I serve as an interim CEO right now for an organization, and we are all, no, we're not all. The majority of us are working remotely, right? We have some staff in office, but not all of us. So this means that our processes are a little more stalled. So we're not doing 48 hours, we're doing more like a week. But even that is more timely for some organizations than others. The other thing I see is we invite people to an event, and then we don't say thank you until it's time to invite them again, right? So think of this, and again, I'm going to share a calendar or a resource tool, rather. It kind of looks like a calendar, but this will help you to map out your donor touches as well. And then the second P here is personalized communication, right? It is very essential. Donors are more savvy and they want to know the communication is for them, right? We need to stop saying dear friend. We need to really insert names now. That is one of my biggest pet peeve, right? If we don't know the names of our donors, that's where we start. We absolutely need to start there. Otherwise, they're gonna know that we just obviously are part of this blast. There are many ways that you can personalize your information, especially if you're using Excel mail merge. But again, a lot of donor databases, they do this mail merge for you, right? They do this insert data field, if you will, into the donor databases. So there's a lot of way to do that. Passionate, right? Be passionate, because passion resonates through the language that you're using. Ethical storytelling, right, is compelling and will draw the donors into your organization. And it also increases their desire to learn more and want to contribute to amplify the impact. And the fourth one of the follow-up is to be positive. That positive interaction and correspondence really does help to foster confidence in the organization. Okay, I'm getting close to that resource. So I want to talk about mapping that donor journey. And I've mentioned some of this already in my previous comments, but really planning consistent touch points. That's so very important, not just when you urgently need their money. To mix up your communications with the updates, some stories, and some appreciation. Again, I mentioned ask, think, report, repeat, right? So you're really kind of blending the mix in here. And avoid only asking when needed cycle, right? So we don't want to only ask when we need. We want to ask, and we want to ask often. That is a big piece of who we are. Okay, if you can't wait and you want to scan this now, this is a download. It does ask for your email. But this will give you, this is a resource tool, again, that I use with my clients, and it helps you to build out your annual fundraising calendar. It also complements with your stewardship. So let's say you have, let's say you do have a big fundraising event in February. Well, you can plan every month, beyond how the impact of that February event has helped your organization. So Map Your Year tool, it really, think of it as a roadmap of how you'll stay connected with your donors throughout the year. It helps you to plan those consistent outreaches and those messages. So you're mixing the touch points, like I said, with the updates, the impact stories, as well as appreciation. And it avoids the all or nothing cycle, right? Where donors only hear from you when you need money. So instead, this really helps to build ongoing trust. The other thing I love about mapping the donor journey here is once you have this written out or digitized, however you prefer to do it, this is a great opportunity for you to share with your team, your boss. Maybe you have a fundraising committee to say, here's all the ways in which we're communicating with our supporters. And that really is helpful. I've seen so many board members, like, their jaws drop, go, I had no idea we had this much going on, right? And it's like, yeah, we're not just sitting here twiddling our thumbs and only meeting, for our board meetings. Like, there's a lot going on, and here's all the layers that we're juggling. Now, when it comes to environmental giving, and I said earlier, right, like, I don't want people to continue thinking of environmental issues as secondary. I want us to frame environmental giving so our supporters understand the impact. And I imagine this remains one of your biggest challenges, and it's really our job to help donors see that our cause is essential. So framing is everything. For example, pollution, right, in a riparian area doesn't just harm the ecosystem in that riparian area. It impacts human health, right? And that will really, like, telling the story will really help supporters to see it as a first issue, not secondary. It impacts human health, and that is something that I think people will get behind if they can't already just get behind environmental issues. Encampments, even along rivers, this raises issues on housing, on sanitation, and environmental justice, right? And when donors start to see these connections, hopefully they really start to understand that environmental giving is not optional. It is vital, right? It is truly vital. So framing this is really everything as we move forward. I mentioned social determinants of health. If that's not something you're familiar with, I encourage you to Google it. There's tons of resources out there, tons of funding out there. Again, I mentioned I live in the Metro Phoenix area. One of our funders here is all around social determinants of health. And if you can't prove that your mission or issue has a piece, right, within social determinants of health, and guess what? pretty much everything does. Pretty much everything impacts the social determinants of health. So think of that way as well. That brings us to any questions. So Lauren, I have not been managing the chat. I haven't taken a look there, but I don't know if we have any relevant questions that maybe I should answer here, or if anyone has some off the top of their head. I've been picking on Denise because I can see your face and Lauren's face.
I know I'm like the only one on camera.
Yeah,
Actually, yeah. So I've been trying to formulate how to ask this question. One of the segments of I'm with Morris County Park Commission and the Alliance for Morris County Parks. One of my donor groups are people who donate because someone is creating or putting a memorial tree or a memorial bench in one of our parks. So neighbors or family members or whomever say, oh yeah, I'll give $25 or $50 towards that effort. And I've always tried to figure out, I mean, some of them obviously might be out of state and, it might be a real challenge to do that. But for the folks who are local, how to get them to do another donation that's separate from that memorial effort that someone put together. Any thoughts on that?
That one's really hard. That peer-to-peer walks, races, things like that, where people come for that thing. They might not, I call them, especially the walk and the races, or an event attendee, right? They're coming for an event, but they're not necessarily, they're not necessarily invested in the mission yet, right?
I have them too.
Okay, so I think, how do we move them? That's a segment in particular events. That's a segment that we say they are event donors. How do we move them to be donors? And my goal there, Denise, could be $5, right? We just want to get them to give beyond the event. And then we add them to the cycle and the stewardship journey. Now, the memorial giving, that's a little trickier. And I'm actually dealing with that currently with one of my clients, is to really honor the reason why they gave the gift and to realize and understand that they may not give to your organization again. And that's okay, right? And so what I choose to do is to send an acknowledgement letter, ask them if they would like to opt in to additional messages, as opposed to just blindly putting everybody into our donor solicitation letters or emails or, all of it. They're likely giving for that particular reason. Now, what you could consider is 6 months later, send another acknowledgement, maybe a photo of the bench in a new season, or if there's something going on, to that group in and of itself, right? Share with them what has changed, what their impact has done in the last 6 months. I wouldn't necessarily ask them to give again, but you could have a soft call to action, right? Where you said you could ask them, but in a more subtle way, as opposed to just like directly, hey, would you make another $250 gift? Those scenarios are a little different, and you can actually track your donor retention if you want to pull out those kind of one-offs. And that might actually, help some things. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any others?
Well, thank you, Jarrett, for posting that on how to connect with you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of more here. So yeah, definitely connect with us. This QR will go to my personal LinkedIn. As I said, I know many of you, all of you, have a lot going on. So if I can help or be of service, please do let me know. We also do training for organizations and individuals. So if that's of interest, I wanted to share this as a gift. Deandra allowed me to do this so kindly. So an introduction to cause selling. If you're interested in this is, again, relationship-driven fundraising. Sorry, my Southern accent came out, dropped the G. Scan this, right? You can use the code for this group in particular. So it's NJEFG25. this will be available to you through the rest of this year, so December. But this is one of the courses of the cause selling education curriculum that I mentioned. If you are interested in this, we invite you to take advantage of that. And then additionally, we've got this amazing portal, no cost, right? Online learning portal. I go to it often. There's webinars, there's past webinars, there's a list of webinars coming up. I'm actually presenting in November. If you want to join me, it's I'm looking at my title here. It's from ask to appreciation. So a little bit into the stewardship as well. So if you want to take advantage of additional resources, I know professional development dollars are often tight. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you. That's it, Lauren.
Wow. This is amazing. Thank you so much for providing us with both the presentation as well as some of these other offerings. How very generous of both of you. We really thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. Yeah.
At this point, I'm going to stop the recording.